So this study is called Using Machine Learning to Classify Feeding Behavior in Aplysia. So in this study, we tried to better understand what is the relationship between neural activity and behavior. So to address this question, we chose the model of feeding behavior in Aplysia, which is a sea snail. Looking at methods, you can see that this feeding behavior consists of multiple distinct parts. Specifically, it has rest, protraction, retraction, and post-retraction. Also, over the course of that whole motion, it can choose to either ingest the food or reject it. So we recorded neural activity from 7 of these animals, and we used PCA to summarize that neural activity into 3 principal components for each animal. Finally, we used machine learning to model those behaviors and try to distinguish them from each other and tell what's different. Specifically, we used a support vector machine. So moving on to results, the first thing we noticed is that each principal component seemed to line up nicely to a different behavior. So you can see that principal component 2 on the left corresponds to the protraction neural network, which you can see on the right. And similarly in the next row, you can see that principal component 1 on the left corresponded to the retraction neural network on the right. And this pattern was actually consistent across the different animals. Under that, you can see a timeline of the neural activity during those different behaviors. So you can see principal component 2 ramping up during the protraction phase, and then principal component 1 ramping up during the retraction phase. And then under that, in red and blue, you can see the weights that the support vector machine used to classify these behaviors. And then at the bottom, you can see 2 confusion matrices showing the accuracy of this classifier. So it achieved a high accuracy when training on 90% of the data and generalizing to the other 10%. And it also achieved a high accuracy when training on 6 of the animals and testing on the remaining 7th animal. So moving on to the third column, we created a similar classifier, but we were trying to distinguish ingestions and rejections. So in this timeline of neural activity, you can see that principal component 1 reaches a much higher level of intensity during ingestions compared with rejections. And under that, you can see the weights that the classifier used to tell these different behaviors apart. Under that, you can see 2 confusion matrices showing the accuracy of this classifier. So it really achieved only a moderate accuracy for distinguishing ingestions versus rejections. And then finally at the bottom, there's a snapshot of neural activity during ingestions and rejections. And this is showing that the activity is much higher during ingestions, and specifically that neural activity is happening in principal component 1. So overall, this study used machine learning to classify feeding behavior in Aplysia. Our method was very successful for classifying different motor behaviors based on neural activity, but distinguishing ingestions from rejections was more difficult and may require a more sophisticated method.